Welcome back to The Scalpel. This is Dr. Keith Rose with Knives in the Box. And we're here to talk to you today about something that Knives and I have been kicking around for the past few days, trying to understand what exactly is going on in our country. We started this podcast, we call it The Scalpel because, one, I'm a surgeon, and two, a scalpel's the best way just to cut straight down to the truth, to try to get right to the heart of the story and figure out what's going on. It's not an easy thing to do. We spoke in our podcast the other day about journalism and read its obituary because journalism is dead. And because journalism is dead, it's very difficult right now to understand actually what's going on. You can read a lot of news articles, but a lot of these news articles are just propaganda or they're well-timed pieces to throw you off the target, off the actual truth. But as I found out in my life, truth resonates. Slogans dissipate. What do I mean by that? Truth maintains and will sustain during time. But when it's not true, or when you're a progressive or a liberal, you have to shout a slogan, and these slogans dissipate. They're kind of like bumper stickers. They look really good when you put them on the car bumper at first. They're all shiny, they're pretty, and then rain hits them, dirt hits them, road grime, and they fade, and they kind of go away, and you got to put another bumper sticker on. And over time, it fades and it goes away, just like these liberal slogans. That's why they repeat things over and over and over again. Because they feel like, as it's been said many times, you say a lie enough times, it becomes the truth. And all this has come down to one thing. We are now in a cold civil war. As a student of history and experience, I look back on the past 34 years. I'm a lot older than 34, but using the most of my cognizant time. You know, if I use a word that someone doesn't understand, I'm going to use Knives to be kind of like that bouncing ball on the words. Knives, you just stop me and say, hey man, slow down. Roger that. So we're going to go down to the basic, as simple as possible, but I can tell you, as a student of history and experience, from my university years to my current situation now, I'm a plastic surgeon, I've had a front row seat in the slow fade of our liberty and freedoms. Not from a tyrannical dictator or king, but from the precipitous, and I mean precipitous unraveling of the Constitution. I believe in the Constitution. I swore an oath to the Constitution like many of you did. And I know that is why we have the republic we have today. But like a well-executed covert action, the fabric of our great nation is slowly being stretched and unraveled, setting the stage for our nation's greatest battle. Don't kid yourself. We're at war. Not the kinetic type of combat seen in conflicts around the world like Iraq, Afghanistan. Not from a foreign threat that seeks the destruction of our country. I mean, they're out there. But that's not the real threat we're facing right now. No, we're in a Cold War that is fighting for the very existence of our republic. This asymmetrical conflict has been brewing for nearly a century, with the slow, meticulous assault on our educational institutions, the ensured generational poverty, both economically and of ideas in our inner city, and the gradual usurping of our everyday freedoms due to a massive, when I say massive, think of a really, really, really big person, central government, and an administrative state that continues to seize liberties through onerous regulations and taxation. This slow metastasis has been nurtured, aided, and abetted by the ideological progressives that are moving to subjugate the masses. That means make you a slave to an all-powerful centralized government, or as I like to call it, a benevolent tyranny. The progressive leaders foist progressive laws on an unsuspecting electorate, that's us, disguised as benevolent actions. See, they're not giving us these laws to hurt us, they're giving us to help us. They're designed to create a utopian steady state where while they continue their tyrannical quests in the name of equality. How did a young nation conquer? I mean, we defeated the most powerful military on the earth. That was England at the time. We fought a civil war for true equality and freedom and defeated a tyranny in Europe twice. We led the Industrial Revolution and continually were on the forefront of research and development. How did we become anesthetized to the basic doctrine that is the foundation of our nation? Why do we elect self-serving representatives, total idiots in local and national government that are hastening the decline of our republic. Can we reverse course? Can we defeat the greatest enemy of our nation has ever known? From my perspective, the answer is clearly yes and clearly no. Now that sounds like a politician, doesn't it? Yes, if the threat is identified, addressed, and countered at every move. No, if the American public continues to chase and believe a progressive narrative that is not supported by history, experience, or intellect, but is maintained by the sophistic demigods. And when I say sophistic, think back to the philosopher times. Sophists were basically, in a nutshell, to make this simple, they were the ones that said it doesn't matter what truth is. We just believe if we say it and yell it loud enough, it will become the truth. So this is maintained by sophistic demigods and a Praetorian Guard media that are determined to drag this republic into the dustbin of history. The only way to defeat the progressive onslaught and restore our republic is to understand we are in a cold civil war. You know, it's hot down here in South Texas, but this is a cold civil war. And to understand it, you first need to understand what you're fighting and what you're dealing with. We talked about the media yesterday. We talked about how they were throwing propaganda at us left and right. We watched Congress, both aisles, as they go after our president, after they go after our freedoms. And we've had a front row seat at probably one of the biggest travesties of justice. And I believe that will go down in history as one of the biggest stains. And that is this congressional obstruction / Russian collusion strategy that has been thrown at our president, President Trump. Now, I'm behind this microphone right now, not because I need something else to do. By God's grace, I am busy. I had 2 days of over 10 hours of operating straight. And right now, I probably should be home playing with my kids, which I will be shortly. But it's important that we take the time to educate not only ourselves, but our friends on what's actually going on. And to do that, you got to do a little scholarship and research. Now, I'm not talking about going to a library and checking out a book. You don't have to do that anymore. But you can get on a computer. You can start looking up articles. Then you can start chasing those links in the articles to see if they're true or not, and then compare them against your history and experience. When I do that, I actually have a little bit of history and experience. I've traveled the entire world. I've been very blessed. I've worked in several countries and spent more than a decade in Afghanistan and Pakistan, a lot of time in Iraq, a lot of time in Africa, Central and South America. I'm a craniofacial surgeon, and fortunately or unfortunately, those are where a lot of the cases are, so I would travel and I'd operate on these kids. And I've gotten to know some interesting people, and I'm going to try to use my experiences from starting out as a surgeon at Parkland Hospital, where I was training initially, to where I am today and add something to what's going on out there. Most doctors are just trying to keep their head out of water based on all these new rules and regulations they're doing to medicine. But I see our country entering, and I think what we've been in for a while, a cold civil war, so I'm going to definitely throw my hat in the ring and see what I can do to make it better. And one of the first articles I read the other day, which really I thought added to uncovering some of this mystery, was a great article by Jeff Carlson. It was printed, yeah, that's right, it was printed, it's also online, in the Epoch Times. And if you want to get a great newspaper, get the Epoch Times. You can get it online. You can actually have it delivered to your house. You can do this, and you can actually hear it crinkle. I like crinkling newspaper in the morning. I like enjoying my caffeine and reading the newspaper, and Epoch Times is really good. And they're good because it's truth. Remember, truth will resonate when you read it. Now, if it's liberal, progressive slogans, that'll dissipate over time, but this is truth. Carlson starts off and he says, in the title of the article, Tracing the Origins of Congressional Democrats' Obstruction, what? Strategy. Remember I said we're in a cold civil war. You got to have a strategy if you're in war. You don't just kind of run out there and say go. And the Democrats know that. They're not real big on fighting our enemies overseas, but they are huge on fighting their political enemies. Article starts off, efforts by members of Congress to advance the narrative that President Donald Trump, quote, obstructed justice, have now replaced the disproven claims of Trump-Russia collusion. Now, anyone that listened to me on the radio for the past, 10 to 15 years, when I would host a local conservative talk show down here, knows that I've been all over this Trump-Russia collusion from the beginning. We're not going to relitigate all that right now. There's several podcasts out there doing it, doing a great job. They're all over this Spygate, but it's been shown that there was no collusion. But that doesn't stop a good Democrat, because a good Democrat, you see, has a strategy. It has a plan. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It just matters what the agenda is, what their goal is. And it states, less than 6 months after Mueller's appointment on October 10th, 2017, the Brookings Institute published the first of 2 reports titled Presidential Obstruction of Justice, the Case of Donald J. Trump, which outlined, among other things, a scenario where Mueller would refer his obstruction findings to Congress, which would then take up the matter to continue investigating. You know, I said this years ago, and you can go back and listen to those old shows. This was never about Russian collusion. This has always been about binding this president, his administration, his strategy, his bid to advance his agenda for the American people, the people that elected him. They want to bog him down at everything. They knew there was no Russian collusion. They knew there was no obstruction, but they have to constantly throw these words out to try to slow him down. So they said, hey, we'll work on obstruction. Now, the cool thing about this is I know a little bit about the Brookings Institute. The Brookings Institute, I highly recommend everyone go and Google it, because it's basically a liberal think tank. And if you remember that word, those words, Brookings Institute, and listen to this article, you're going to find out that the Democrats realized they're at war. They had a strategy, and they were implementing it long before Mueller actually gave his report. This article goes on. There were 2 authors, two lawyers, Norman Eisen and Barry Burke, the 2 authors of the Brookings report. These 2 guys were later retained by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler. So the report talking about the possibility of Trump obstruction years ago just happened to hire these 2 lawyers that wrote it, were put on retainer by Chubby himself, Jerry Nadler. He retained them on a consulting basis as a special oversight counsel to the Democrat majority staff. Now think about this for a second. Nadler retained these guys that wrote this report years ago because he had a plan, he had a strategy. He's going after our president. So he got these guys on retainer. You know why he does that? And Nadler, I think, is a politician. I think he's a lawyer. They have lawyers in Congress. The problem is a lot of them are a bunch of idiots. So they actually retain good lawyers. And what better lawyer to retain than someone that's already pushing out your narrative years before you actually have to use it? But the special counsel's focus on obstruction of justice went on. I'm going to move forward in this article, but it talks, the Mueller report stated that in regards to obstruction, several statutes could apply, including sections 1503 and 1505. But the special counsel, see short bus, chose to focus primarily on section 1512, which, as the report states, is the omnibus obstruction of justice provision that covers a range of obstruction acts directed at pending or contemplated official proceedings. Okay, I know it's a lot of big words in there. Basically, what they did is they were cherry-picking the law, and they were looking for a section of the law, I'm going to keep this as simple as possible, that was as broad as possible so that they could continue attacking this president. The special counsel's report dedicates a full section to defending the use of section 1512 and adopting the broadest interpretation possible. Think about it. They knew the section they wanted to use. They knew where they were going with obstruction. This is before we're even talking about it like we are today. The article goes on, the promotion of the use of section 512. Now, to do that, among the first mentions suggesting the use of this section was June 2nd, 2017. June 2nd, 2017. 2 years ago, an article published by the website Lawfare, which is published by the Lawfare Institute in cooperation with drum roll, The Brookings Institute. So you have the Brookings Institute, fingers all over this, years before they're actually talking about obstruction. You see, what they're doing is they're setting it up. And when they're setting it up, that's when the real problems begin. This lawfare blog was already writing articles going after Donald Trump. And so when you go down further, you can see Lawfare Editor-in-Chief Ben Witz and law student Helen Klein Murillo, because if you're a liberal, you have to have at least like 3 or 4 names, write in a blog post headlines, does an FBI investigation qualify under the obstruction of justice status? A closer look. Usually when you see an editor-in-chief and a law student, the law student did all the work. The editor-in-chief just kind of put his name on it. We see that a lot in medicine too. The article was written, so it goes on to say that it's possible that 512 is the most appropriate statutory provision to use. You go on down, it says the article was written approximately 2 weeks after Mueller was appointed special counsel. So let's slow down and understand this. They're looking at, where did we get this obstruction from? Most of the American people go out there and think, oh, the obstruction is from the Mueller report. Part 1 was saying that there was no Russian collusion. Part 2 was saying possibly could have been. We didn't see obstruction, but it possibly could. Again, we're going to throw out the broadest definition possible. Except before Mueller was even appointed, this was being put into play. So what I did, I don't know, the whole scholarship thing, I got on the internet. Didn't take me very long. I just went back to this blog, and I looked up this Witz Lawfare blog. And I came across something very interesting. And they go on to talk about it here in the article. It says the Brookings Institute produced a 108-page report, Presidential Obstruction of Justice, the Case for Donald J. Trump, authored by Barry Burke. Mr. Brookings, gentleman. They followed up with a 177-page second edition on August 22nd, 2018, which also came with a lengthy appendix. Basically, they are outlining what to do with obstruction. Now, we haven't even gotten to obstruction yet, but they're already working on it. So I actually looked up one of the documents they wrote, and I find it very interesting. And I got it here. It was written by Benjamin Witz, and he goes on to say, and I believe this was back in 2017, he's talking about a coalition of Democrat forces. What if Trump wins? He says, given these numbers, it's tempting to not plan for a Trump presidency. Personally, I'd like nothing more than to sweep the possibility under the high impact but low probability event rug. Right alongside all those asteroid impacts and worldwide pandemics I don't spend much time preparing for. Better yet, I would love to put it in the category of a horror movie, sort of zombie apocalypse I can enjoy imagining, knowing that it is impossible. But the events with the 7% chance of happening actually take place all the time, and events that have a 16% chance of happening take place more than twice as often as that. Wow, what a freaking genius. He says things that have a 7% chance of happening happen all the time, but if it's a 16% chance, it can happen twice as much. These math geniuses just blow me away. And they actually write this. It's in his little blog. He goes on to say, this is why I keep life insurance, even though I have a much lower than 7% chance of dying this year. I don't know how big your chance of dying this year is, but I bet your career is on life support. And while I don't think I have a 16% chance of a major medical expense either, I don't think he's thinking about his Obamacare, I still maintain a healthy insurance policy. He goes on to talk about basically, we have to plan in case Trump wins how to take him down. And they give an outline of what they're going to do. That's why Carlson's all over it in his article. He talks about Eisen, too, a senior fellow at Brookings, served as the White House special counsel for ethics and government reform under President Barack Obama. Now, look, what I found out about Eisen and the Brookings Institutes as a senior fellow, if he was on the special counsel for ethics and government reform under Barack Obama, that's the equivalent of someone saying, I was on the special counsel for the treatment of women and the respectful treatment and ethical treatment of women under Bill Clinton. It makes no sense. This guy is a complete chucklehead. He has no ethics. That's the way you can speak. You can pick out a progressive or a Democrat. They have no ethics, but they will say they do. If you want to know a Democratic program, what it's really about, look at the title and then just play opposite day. You'll nail it every time. Office for good governance, office for giving you more taxes. Office for women health, nah, it's office for women not being healthy, but just subjugating you to more regulations. It's pretty straightforward. So this article goes on, and then it goes down to the third author of all these lengthy blog posts and recommendations to go after our president. The third author, Barry Burke, is a trial and white-collar criminal defense lawyer who recently defended two douche bank investment professionals in a criminal case the government described as the largest tax shelter prosecution. Earlier in his career, Burke was a trial lawyer with the Federal Defender's Office for the Southern District of New York. Have you heard those words before? Southern District. It's where our president's getting a lot of grief right now from the Southern District. You know, this is such an incestuous group of people. They're not even original. You can listen to Dan Bongino's podcast on Spygate, and he has dissected these guys beautifully. He's written a great book about it, and I recommend, I try to recommend a book a day. Sometimes if I come across a great book I think is worth reading, it's worth reading. He ties it all together. But to just keep it at 100,000 feet, you have people from the Brookings Institute preparing to go after our president way before our president is even, way before there's ever a special counsel appointed to investigate our president. You see, this was already in the bag before there was a bag. The article says, for example, the report notes that Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele, the author of the dossier, were hired by political opponents of President Trump. The report fails to mention that Fusion GPS was hired by Perkins Coie on behalf of the DNC and the Clinton campaign. I mean, they acknowledge it and then they immediately deflect. They're like, oh yeah, it was a political opponent. No, it was the opponent of President Trump that was spying on them. These pesky facts always get in the way. It goes on further. It says on February 12th, and this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, and this is what got me looking at it going, oh man, this guy nails it. On February 12, 2019, Nadler announced that two of the Brookings report authors, Burke and Eisen, we've talked about both of those chuckleheads, had been retained on consulting basis as special oversight counsels. Do you know what happened in December of 2018? Just a month or two before. That's when Attorney General Barr was nominated. You see, they realized there was going to be a real lawman on the other side of the bench. And these guys in Congress realized one thing. We need someone that can actually fight for us. And who better than the guys that were originally spewing out all this stuff, prepping the battle space for the Cold Civil War before all this. It goes on and on. But bottom line is this. Trump was ahead of them all the way. And that's what's driving the mainstream media crazy. The article talks about William Barr's foresight. As previously mentioned, Section 1512 is a rather obscure statute. We talked about it. It goes on to say, in both letters, one from June 23, 2017, and the second from January 29, 2018, the president's lawyers addressed the matter of obstruction. Sections 1505, the standard for obstruction, is mentioned in the letter 39 times. Section 1512 isn't mentioned once because Trump's lawyers can't even imagine someone actually using 1512 because it's so random. But apparently there was one individual who foresaw its possible use. On June 8, 2018, Barr, who was then a lawyer in a private practice, sent a lengthy memo to A.G. Rosenstein and the assistant AG, Steve Engel. See, Barr was already on top of it. He already saw it looks like Mueller's going to rely on some random, really obtuse obstruction clause and try to set the president up. And that's what eventually happened. Simply by giving direction on a case or class of cases, an official opens himself to a charge that he has acted with improper motive and thus becomes a subject to a criminal investigation. If you actually accuse the president of obstruction under this clause, Barr is saying any member, any official can be accused of the same thing just for opening up a case. Now let's see. Let's take history and experience and go back just a second and look at societies that you could just be charged with anything and have a case opened up against you. I believe someone once said, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." Every good communist should know that. Or every good liberal, and it looks like that's what they're doing. You know, Jeff Carlson's article is fascinating. It goes on to say, on February 12, 2019, Nadler announced that two of the Brookings Report authors, Burke and Eisen, had been retained on consulting basis as special oversight counsels to the Democrat majority staff. Now, Brookings Institute, Burke, Eisen. So I started Googling them and, doing my research. Actually, I don't use Google, but I use a different search engine. And I found an interesting article back from December 7th, 2018. Now, this is a year before these guys were hired by Nadler. And does this sound familiar? The article is from the New York Times and is titled, "Is This the Beginning of the End for Trump?" The article goes on to say, on Friday, federal prosecutors in Manhattan and the special counsel Robert Mueller delivered a potential devastating 1-2 punch against President Trump. Coming late in the day, they made for a bracing end-of-the-week reading. First of all, any news dumped at the end of the week is dumped there so no one can respond to it because it's usually garbage news. So they set this dumpster on fire before anyone could really respond to it. Going on in this article, it says, calling on the court to impose a sentence of substantial imprisonment against Michael Cohen, the president's former personal attorney, prosecutors in the Southern District of New York stated that Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization and the campaign were all directly involved in an illegal scheme to silence two women who claimed they had affairs with Mr. Trump. The article goes on and on to just bang on Trump, and then it gets over to Russian collusion. They said, in crediting Mr. Cohen with providing substantial and significant efforts to assist the investigation, Mr. Mueller's separate sentencing memo details new evidence of collusion with Russia, including a previously unreported phone conversation in November 2015 between Mr. Cohen and an unnamed Russian who claimed to be a trusted person in Moscow. The Russian explained to Mr. Cohen how the Russian government could provide the Trump campaign with political synergy and synergy on a government level, and offered to set up a meeting between Mr. Trump and then candidate for the Republican presidential nomination and President Vladimir Putin of Russia. And it ends, this newly disclosed conversation directly speaks to the question of collusion. The outreach was explicitly political and focused on how each side would gain from the potential partnership. This was December 17th, 2018. Then, on February 12th, 2019, a year later, fast forward a year, there's no Trump collusion. Everything's fallen apart. Everything written in this opinion piece by these two guys, Burke and Eisen, who work for the Brookings Institute, and also in association with the Southern District in New York, are shown to be pure crap, lies, and yet they throw them out there. So you would think that in doing research on hiring counsel, Jerry Nadler would look for, men of integrity, honor, and I'm just kidding. That's kind of rhetorical. He's not going to look for any of that. Nadler's going to look for the biggest clowns in the car. He's going to look for the guys that have been lighting the dumpster fire long before anyone even knew that a flame was smoldering. So he brings these two guys on. You literally have the guy that now has oversight because the Democrats took back the House, the guy that has the oversight that's running and subpoenaing everyone, hires the two lawyers that are writing outright lies and part of this propaganda / Spygate / BS strategy to attack our president. So at the end of the day, we have a really great article, and I recommend you go and see it. It's a long article, and Hope I haven't confused you too much, but at the end of the day, you have the liberals already planning obstruction before you had a special counsel appointed. They had already written in legal blogs and liberal blogs about how they were going to go after this president, and then gave lengthy appendix to kind of direct the foot soldiers in this cold civil war and point them at our duly elected president of the United States. But by God's grace, we didn't elect just anybody. We elected a president who is smart, who has been in the real world, and I believe who the liberals have so underestimated, it is staggering. I'm not sure whether it's their sheer stupidity or just their massive arrogance and ego. But one way or another, they just can't get a handle on this president because he always seems to be one step ahead. Even when the media says the world is crashing in, our president seems to move right on. I got a lot more to go. This is Dr. Keith Rosen, Knives. Gospel supports veterans and veteran-owned companies, and I want to tell you about an amazing company, Flipside Canvas. Flipside Canvas is a premium art company, veteran-owned and operated by Medal of Honor recipient Dakota Meyer. Flipside's art is proudly made in Austin, Texas. That's right, America, with materials and parts 100% sourced in America. They even offer a 100% lifetime guarantee on their canvases, ranging from hundreds of designs from their Jocko Willink collection, Pipe Hitters Union, patriotic and inspiring art for your home or office. New designs are updated every single day. Let me just tell you, folks, if you really want to boil this down, this is badass art made by American badasses. And I think it's great. So visit Flipside Canvas. Go to flipsidecanvas.com. If you like what you see, get yours today and get 30% off your first order. Flipside Canvas. They're not decorations, they're declarations. We're talking about a cold civil war because that's where I believe we are today as a nation. We're fighting against folks that are against the Constitution, that are against freedom. I don't know any other way to say it. We're fighting against people that believe that whatever they say is true and that history and experience don't mean anything. What's more important is that you believe everything they say, vote for who they want you to, and do what they tell you to. A cold civil war is bad enough in your own country. But you also need to look at what a cold civil war causes while it's being fought. When we were fighting a cold war against Russia, we had the U.S., and we were against the Soviet countries, the Soviet Union, and Cuba, and some other countries out there, and the axis of evil. It was fought by the intelligence agencies. Our intelligence agency was actually fighting against their intelligence agencies. That's why it was a Cold War. It was done quietly. It was done behind the scenes. Lots of smoke and mirrors. Lots of what we call covert action was taking place. The problem is in our cold civil war today in our country, we're fighting it with our intelligence agencies attacking the very institution that gives them the right to exist in the first place. And that's where it gets weird and really alarming. You see, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and a number of alphabets in the soup have really good people working at them. But what has come out in the past few years and recently is that people in the highest positions of authority have abused them and have turned the machinations or the special processes, the methods that we use to spy to protect our country. They've turned those methods and procedures on certain officials here in the United States in order to keep and maintain power and promote an ideology that the majority of Americans don't support. You see, intelligence professionals know how to fight a cold civil war. I was looking in the Epoch Times in their opinion section, and I came across something that I thought was pretty spot on. It was actually written today by a gentleman named Brad Johnson. and it's titled CIA in the Spotlight. Brad Johnson is a former senior officer who worked in the Directorate of Operations. The DO in the CIA was basically the spy side of the CIA. The guys that actually were the GSD, the get stuff done guys. They used to be really good. They used to do some amazing things. Not so sure now what's going on with them. But I do know that the CIA is up to their special decoder rings and problems due to the fact that the former DCI, or head of the CIA, John Brennan, appears, and I will tell you, is smack dab in the middle of the Democrat strategy to overthrow the election of our president, President Trump. And they can do it because they grade their own homework. I mean, when you do a covert action, you basically do it so no one knows what's going on. You make people think one thing, so they do another. And you have to have a very functioning, well-oiled intelligence group to do this. It's very difficult overseas, but it's very good to protect and keep our nation safe. However, when we turn it on our own politicians and the own electorate, then it becomes, there's a word I'm trying to get, treason. Yeah, I knew it was out there. But this article written by Brad Johnson, who I believe is a patriot, and I love it, starts out, the New York Times published an article on June 12th titled, Justice Department Seeks to Question CIA in its own Russia investigation. The article is largely a liberal spin with some artistic interpretations of the facts. Isn't that nice? This guy, I like the way he writes. What he's saying, artistic interpretation of the facts, means they're lying their butts off. I'm from Texas. When you have an artistic interpretation of something, you're lying. But there are a few data points worth noting, he goes on to say. The CIA's problem, and why it is being questioned, is that its intelligence reporting strongly supported the premise that there was collusion between Russia and the now President Donald Trump's campaign. Since it turned out to be a false premise, U.S. Attorney General William Barr is asking both the FBI and the CIA why they supported the collusion charges when there was zero proof and zero evidence. This isn't a question mark. This is a statement. This is what makes me want to wrap my head in duct tape sometime. Two of our supposedly premier intelligence services, the Central Intelligence Agency, which should be overseas intelligence, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which should be keeping us safe here at home, reported on the premise of something about our president that is patently false. Let me explain something to folks. When you make a report in intelligence, I do a lot of reading, you have to put in an intelligence report. It goes to central reporting. It'll be reviewed by analysts. There's several reports that may be on a single topic, and they will look at that and make sure that it's true before they actually put it out in the final intelligence product. What they don't want is something called circular reporting. That's where one source will report on A, and then another source will report on the same thing. But if the two sources know each other, then they're not, quote, both reporting from separate sources on the same thing where you can believe it, but it's circular reporting, meaning one source is supporting the other source, and it may benefit both of them to say the same thing. You got to be careful with that, especially overseas. And all basic Intelligence 101 officers know this. But evidently, the highest levels of the FBI and CIA didn't appear to grade their reports or homework. They went ahead with a premise that this former highly ranked intelligence officer said was zero proof and zero evidence. He goes on to say Barr was quite clear in the interviews that the responses he has received from current FBI leadership haven't answered this question. Barr can only conclude there's a strong possibility the motives were political, which means a long list of laws have been broken. Again, the word treason comes to mind. The word malfeasance comes to mind. You know, when I look at this, and there's more, and I'm going to read it to you, but I just have to give a little editorial here. AG Barr, Attorney General Barr, appears like he is doing this because he believes in truth, and the man has virtue. He says the motives were political. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the military, the CIA, and any other government organizations should not be political when you're protecting and defending the Constitution of the United States of America. You do it right. You do it with virtue. You do it protecting the Constitution. When the motives are political and you're using taxpayer dollars and secrets and secret methods, whether it's the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, using all the tools they have to spy to keep and maintain political power or direct the electorate or political winds in their direction, there is no higher level, in my eyes, of malfeasance. I can think of nothing short of Benedict Arnold at this time. And that's a cause for concern, because not only when your leaders are doing that, the hardworking men and women of the CIA and FBI, the true believers that are just starting out in their careers, are eventually going to exit because they will not follow weak, virtuous leaders. Not good ones. The ones that stay will, and then you will have an entire agency or an entire bureau of sycophants that aren't going to keep this nation safe and protect the Constitution. They're going to protect their jobs. And that makes this nation weak, and that is dangerous. Let this sink in. There's only an average constitution around the world in history. A country that has a constitution, the average constitution only lasts 17 or 18 years. We're 242 years running. There's a reason for that. And we're only going to get back to it with history and experience. He goes on in this article. As I have long reported, both in interviews and previous opinion pieces, at the very least, and I really mean the very least, this is from the article, it's in parentheses, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court application for a warrant and subsequent renewals were a violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 1001, which makes it illegal to attest to that false statements are true. What he's saying is, people that signed that FISA warrant, people that swore out statements in those FISA warrants broke the law. He goes on to say, many media reports have shown that everyone knew the Steele dossier was a political document and had nothing to do with intelligence prior to being used to justify the FISA warrant. This is clearly going to be a problem for senior FBI and Department of Justice officials who signed these documents. Yeah, I would classify this is going to be a problem for senior FBI and Department of Justice officials who sign those documents as the understatement of the century. But I respect this author so much in his diplomatic way of saying, this should be more than a problem. This should be prison time. Going on, he talks about working his way down the list of those who appear to be involved in what looks in every way to be a criminal conspiracy. He didn't say wrong interpretation. He didn't say an artistic deviance. He said it looks in every way to be a criminal conspiracy. Barr now wants to interview the CIA officers who were involved and see if they have any sort of satisfactory answer. This is something the CIA officers are simply not going to be able to answer because we already know there was no Russian collusion. Be prepared to see the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, and former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, on the list of those to be questioned. It has been widely reported that current CIA Director Gina Haspel has instructed the senior officials in the spotlight to cooperate, but to protect sources and methods. Let me translate this for everyone. Haspel has just drawn a line in the sand. The questions Barr wants to ask are related to what was supposed to have been intelligence reporting, i.e. reporting that supported the collusion nonsense. That means it will all be cloaked behind sources and methods, and the CIA officers can therefore decline to answer any significant questions. The plan here is clear and conclusive. Drag your feet and leak anything that can help stall investigations and hang on until the 2020 elections and hope Trump loses. The rallying cry for the left is going to be, we must protect secrets in order to stop or stall the questioning, and Haspel will have significant support from the mainstream media and Democrat politicians. I have a question. Since we know there was no collusion and the reporting used was therefore false, what secrets exactly are we protecting that are so important? If there was indeed a source that provided this sort of false information, the source lied to us and isn't worth protecting. Full stop. If it's made up for political motives, it has to be protected by all costs by the left. And it seems to be that's what fits the circumstances, this author says. But this is what everyone has missed. I love when he says this. Haspel drew her line in the sand, and Trump responded in kind. On June 14th, the president signed a memorandum on providing an order of succession within the Central Intelligence Agency, which was immediately made public. I'm telling you, this president is smart. This is not unheard of, but still not something very commonly done for the CIA. And the timing here is pretty clearly a message that the White House is perfectly willing to replace Haspel and likely many of the others named in the list of succession. This guy says, I won't go through publicly available lists in detail, but everyone should be aware that the names that are highest on that list of succession were also in senior positions under former CIA Director John Brennan. Most were, in fact, handpicked by Brennan, and a couple were even brought out of retirement to serve in those senior positions. Let me tell you guys, anyone picked by Brennan is weak, is a team player for Brennan who is not an intelligent person to begin with. I've done show after show on Brennan, and he is a leaky vessel at best. Gina Haspel, I'm very disappointed, and she's going to have a lot to answer for, I believe. If memory serves me straight, I think she was chief of station in London when John Brennan was DCI, and then there were problems in London with the Steele dossier, something like that. I'm sure someone will probably check into that. And I don't know if she knew what was going on or she knew and just said nothing. I don't know if I'd rather be a traitor, a coward, or part of both of them. I can't even understand that. When Trump settled on Haspel to replace Pompeo, this author publicly pointed out, don't do it. But he has a message for Trump this time, and he says, this time around, my message to Trump this time around is to find a career CIA intelligence officer who is a patriot to be CIA director. I would probably add to that, they're out there. I know several of them. They don't work in the CIA anymore. But they're out there, Mr. President. They're great men, and they see what's going on. This gentleman, Brad Johnson, is probably one of them. And they scare the people that are currently in leadership there to death. Because you see, what this opinion piece is saying is critical to understand this cold civil war. The intelligence services are going to obstruct any questions into their methods and sources. They are protecting the methods and sources that have produced the lies and misinformation. I'm a happily married man. I take that back. I'm an extremely happy married man. And if my wife came and asked me something, I would tell her the truth. If I thought I needed to protect something for my wife's sake, I can't really think of anything, and she's listening. She's from Mexico. Honey, I would never do that. But I would not protect a lie and a mistruth unless I had something to hide. I would immediately show everything that I had. You see, the intelligence services grade their own homework. A lot of them have black budgets. We don't even know how much money's being poured in to them. And I'm going to add something to this opinion piece. Mr. President, you need to put some of those leaders down, single subject polygraphs, get to the bottom of this, and take a page out of DCI Casey's book back when he came in when Reagan was president. You need to get someone like a DCI Casey, a Dewey Claridge, and clean house. You need people that support the Constitution of the United States and not the liberal ideology of progressive elites who don't even believe in the greatness of the greatest nation in the world, and they surely don't believe in freedom based on their actions. It's time to do some house cleaning. And it would start right at the top, because everybody knows a fish rots from the head down. Now, to close down this podcast, I think we've been talking about some serious things. We are definitely in a cold civil war. But as the fish rots from the head down, there's also just some fish in the barrel that are just rotten all the way across. Some are rotten because they're smart and they want to do the wrong thing to obstruct justice. Some of them are just useful idiots. And I think one of the biggest useful idiots, although people are concerned about her, and I think there's good reason, because she has a following, so it means that, some people in this country may only have two neurons, one being inhibitory, and they'll listen to someone like AOC. But I live in South Texas, and she recently visited my part of this great state. And what she said about the men and women that are actually working to try to maintain our borders with a massive flux of illegal aliens, undocumented Democrats trying to cross the border. They're doing the best they can, and they're doing a great job. But you see, truth resonates. Slogans dissipate. And she can't tell the truth. So when you deal with the Democrat, they're never going to talk to you in the arena of truth and ideas. They're going to attack you personally. They're going to make up things, because you can't have a cold civil war without propaganda and without outright lies. And there's no one better than AOC. She recently visited one of the detention centers, and we got a few cuts from that because I'm really kind of interested to see what she has to say. Cut one, go.
Okay, we're able to get through this. My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I am the Congresswoman from New York's 14th Congressional District. I represent a community that is overwhelmingly diverse in all ways.
Stop. She represents a community that is overwhelmingly diverse. Well, it's New York. You know where they're not diverse in your community? They all vote Democrat. You won in an overwhelmingly Democrat voting community with a weak challenger. I mean, you had it in the bag. There's no diversity in your community. No real diversity. And what I mean is there's no diversity of thought. Keep going.
We have urban communities. I represent home-owning communities. I represent constituents that are both immigrants and United States citizens. And both, oftentimes.
Stop. I love it. I represent citizens that are both immigrants. I represent people that are both immigrants and citizens. Wow. She's such a brain trust. Most of us came from someone that immigrated here. But, I'm not even going to go there. Keep going.
What we saw today was unconscionable. No child should ever be separated from their parent.
Stop. Listen to her words, because besides lying, she's an idiot. What we saw today. Now, I looked online, and maybe it's out there. I couldn't find it. I saw where she made this statement over and over again, but I didn't hear any we. I don't hear anyone else supporting her. In fact, I see Nancy Pelosi running so far in the opposite direction. Someone said, hey, what do you think about AOC? And I think Nancy Pelosi thinks that that's like some Cineplex with 16 screens or something, because she don't want to talk about her. But keep going.
No child should ever be taken from their family. No woman should ever be locked up in a pen when they have done no harm to another human being. They should be given water. They should be given basic access to human rights. And it is a false notion. The idea that we have to choose between people is a false notion.
Stop. A false notion that we have to choose between people. I love it when people are incoherent. Ayok, here's a true notion. What are you saying? You're just throwing things out there to see what sticks. None of this is supported, and we're going to get to that. You just want to say just the craziest stuff because you are the designated bomb thrower, metaphorically, for the Democrat Party right now in this cold civil war. It used to be Anthony Weiner, and, well, we know what happened to him, and that still bugs me why the Republicans don't wrap the Weiner around the liberals, because Weiner was out there doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So they should just wrap the Weiner around Chuck Schumer, who birthed the Weiner. They should wrap the Weiner around the liberal parties that used the Weiner to be the bomb thrower. But no, we went from the Weiner to, I don't know, Mr. Ed's niece. Continue.
No child ever has to suffer for the benefit of another.
Stop. Miss Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as she likes to say, you just said no child should suffer for the benefit of another. I just have one question for you. What about abortion? Every aborted child suffers for the benefit of another. Oh, I know. Only children that aren't born here, that are brought up to our border, where no one knows whether the people that are bringing them up are their parents or not. You see, I do have some inside baseball on this. I have a relative that is one from my wife's side of the family that's works for the Border Patrol and has for over a decade, and he is one in a position of leadership in one of those sectors, and I have great insight into what's going on. You see, Miss Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if you really cared about those children, you would want to know who's bringing them here, because a lot of them are being trafficked. A lot of them are being brought up here and sold. And you're making it extremely easy for them with your diatribes and your lies, where you just run out and yell, no one should have to do this, and everyone should be with whoever they want to be with, and we're not going to separate the children from their family. They're doing DNA swabs right now, and a lot of these kids aren't traveling with their families. I own several clinics in this town, and I can tell you story after story, because we take care of a lot of these folks that come across the border. The Border Patrol will actually bring them to our clinic. And I never forget the call I had several years ago. I actually wrote an article about it, where a young lady was literally in tears because of the abuse she had getting to our country. Not once she's been here. She was taken great care of once she got here. But she said, I was told that I could come here and everything would be okay. And she had horrible things done to her to get here. And when she got here, they were going to deport her. And this is when President Barack Obama was there, your hero. And she said, and she was literally in tears going, why did they tell me I could come here? I went through these horrible things, and then I'm being sent home. It's because you have a lot of people promoting illegal immigration. And I'm going to get to that in other shows. You see, I worked down in Guatemala. I actually have some firsthand experience with this. Something Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't. The only thing she has firsthand experience is saying what she's told to say. I mean, do you remember the other day where she was talking about Ivanka Trump? And how is she qualified? She was on Twitter literally saying Ivanka Trump is not qualified. This woman is an international businesswoman. She has done more in a day and been more accomplished than AOC has in her entire life. But I guess slinging beers down the bar makes you qualified to be a member of Congress and vote on our budgets? I found one more cut of her. I dub her hashtag the gift, because every time she opens her mouth, this is just gifts for the Republicans, gifts for the constitutionalists. My advice for the Republicans are, you're in a cold civil war. Go on the offense. Show some stones. Quit worrying about yourself and start thinking about the country. I know it's harsh, but that's the truth. Not all of you, but more of you than should be. Knives, you got cut two there, brother?
Yes, sir.
There's abuse.
Why don't we tee that up?
There's abuse. This was them on their best behavior, and they put them in a room with no running water, and these women were being told by CBP officers to drink out of the toilet.
Stop. Again, she's an idiot. You know what I do every night to my children? I put them in a room with no running water. Did you know that? Their bedrooms have no running water. And they don't drink out of toilets. Someone actually put a picture of the toilets and the sinks that these folks are using, and they're both made of stainless steel. They look similar, but one actually is down low like a toilet, and the other's actually high like a sink. So I guess AOC just gets them a little confused because, sink, toilet, toilet, sink. I don't know what she's grown up with, but most people know the difference. Keep going.
Out of the toilet, and that was them knowing a congressional visit was coming. This is CBP on their best behavior, telling people to drink out of the toilet.
Did you see somebody actually do that?
Of course not. Did you see someone stop? Did you see someone actually do it? And she doesn't answer. She said they were told to drink out of the toilet. That's what they were being told. Did you see someone do it? Are you going to quote a source? Do you have the lady that was told that standing next to you? No. You're the bomb thrower. You're the new Weiner. You're the more intersectional version of the Weiner, Anthony Weiner. Look, I understand. We're in a cold civil war. It's not going to be won overnight. But we need more people getting in the fight. And I know, I hear it right now. People are upset because people that were supposedly conservative aren't acting it. You got John Roberts out there. Everyone said, I thought he was conservative. Well, let me just clue you in. He's not. He might be on some things, but he's not. But instead of complaining about it, use it. When you see someone like a John Roberts, you can use it as a teaching point because every example can either be used for something good to teach or something not good to teach. So when I see John Roberts, I just tell people when they come up and they're like, he's not conservative, he should be conservative. Good. Then you be the conservative you think he should be and recruit 2 or 3 more friends. It's time for us to get involved in taking back our country, not through a kinetic war, not supporting that, but through education, through talking about real history and real experience. Tomorrow's the 4th of July. Be with your family, hug your kids, talk about the founding, and keep freedom rolling.